Good afternoon. Welcome to the nave of the Riverside Church. I'm Amy Butler. I'm the senior minister. It's good to be here with you today. There is something in every human life that longs to leave some kind of mark on the world. And I know that for a minister especially, there is a longing to leave that legacy through the lives of those her ministry touches. So many of you here today are the living legacy of the Rev Dr Mariah Britton, God's gift to the world. All of you, midwifed by her skillful ministry. She made the Riverside Church a place where young people could find everything they needed to grow into God's dreams for their lives, for your lives. She made the Riverside Church a home. It's my honor then, in her memory and in celebration of her life and ministry, to welcome you back to this place, to welcome you home. Would you join me in prayer? God who creates and recreates us, God who laughs with us and weeps with us, God who walks with us each step of the way, carrying us when our strength fails. We gather today to celebrate a life and to grieve a loss. So we ask that your Spirit would be here to move in and around us today. As we gather to remember and give thanks for the life of your beloved child, Mariah Britton, remind us that even as life ends, we are not alone. Thank you, gracious God, for the powerful legacy of Dr. Britton's life, standing as a witness to all we can do and be to make this world more just and kind and filled with hope. In the name of the resurrected Christ, we pray. Amen.
Good afternoon. I'm Rev's niece, Shamika Mitchell, and I am reading one of her early classic poems. I don't know how many of you knew that she was a poet. And one of her more popular anthologized poems is called Solution Number 8, With Fire. A moan chains the shaking around my feet. Stumble, fall. A moment further I try with fire. Take me to the ocean. Prepare the skin for stripping. Let salt, raw tissue, let the crust of my failure wash in the depth and womb of the sea. Bear me string, cross the distance between reason and faith. I am a kite, waiting wind. Tell fear not to laugh at my battle, nor fill my ears with the wall of unforgiven. I am the remains of generations, flogging the beast who eats hope. Forever are these on me a weight, the promised mile, a feather, a head bent low each night, the desire to fly, to scrape across the face of torture, the knife deep in my throat. I spew phlegm of captives made slave by a quest, exhumed through a nave. Myself holds the ideal. My knuckles bleed from thinking. With fire, I am change, carbon, black, linked to what is life. This was published October 1979.
Good afternoon to all of you. First of all, I want to thank you, Pastor Amy, for welcoming us home and for welcoming us into this space to have this celebration. What can be said about a woman who meant so much to so many? What words can possibly capture the life-saving, soul-stirring, mind-directing, spirit-forming power that this woman leveraged on our behalf? What language could we ever find to do justice and honor to the legacy of a woman who was larger than life, who stood before us as a tall tree under which we could always find shade, but also strength and stability? I am reminded of Anselm, who, in struggling to find the words that could adequately describe God, declared that God was that than which nothing else is greater. In answering the call to ministry and receiving the rite of ordination and coming to Riverside to serve as the minister to youth and young adults, Mariah Britton was seeking to do the work of that than which nothing else is greater. She was seeking to do work that was greater than great, higher than high, more excellent than excellent. And she did it. Oh, how she did it. The truth is that words can never adequately express how grateful we are for her and for her witness and for the impact that she had on our lives. We are not here today because the funeral in Brooklyn that many of us attended was not good or was not great. It was all of that and more. We are here today because the work of Mariah was greater than great. And so even if we had 10,000 more tongues to sing praises of her gospel witness, and even if we were to convene 5 more services of remembrance, it would never be enough. It would never be enough. I could speak at great length today about the influence that Reverend Britt, as I fondly called her, had on my life as a rambunctious, which I was, and yet somewhat geeky adolescent boy and young man, which I also was. But I will not be standing before you this afternoon to deliver a traditional eulogy, but instead to help guide us down the walkway as we remember together who and what she was to us in this towering branch of Zion called the Riverside Church, and who she was for us in the fragile lives that we brought to her for help, even if we did not always have sense enough to ask for it. And so we begin our journey today with a simple verse from Proverbs that captures the spirit of God's omnipresence that Reverend Britton represented during the seasons in which she watched over us. The eyes of the Lord are in every place, keeping watch on the evil and the good. We shall sing Blessed Assurance together, page 341 in your hymnals. And then Mrs. Danielle King will come and help us to understand what she meant to her. Won't you stand?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Danielle King. I have a long-standing relationship with Rev, long for me. I met her when I was 12. She confirmed me in this church, took me on many a retreat. I went through rites of passage, second hour, numerous Bible lessons. I was married in this church by Reverend Britton. My children and my home have been blessed all individually by Reverend Britton as well. I was also, and still am currently, a board member of the Mariah Institute that she founded to continue some of her work that was founded here in this church with a few familiar faces in the room. Not on my watch. Some of you have heard me say it before, and I'll say it again. I think everyone should have a Reverend Britton in their life. Have you ever been caught in the middle of the night, trying to do something you know you should not be doing by Reverend Britton? I have. Time and time and time again. Not on my watch, was what she told me. You know, the saying goes, it takes a village to raise a child. Definitely for myself and for many others that I see in this space, Reverend Britton was a part of that village. She was a leader and a spiritual guide here in this community that raised me. And as she welcomed us into her life, she took on a surrogate mother-like role. She cared for us, she guided us, she protected us. She gave us what we needed even when we didn't know that we needed it. Now, these lessons of love from Reverend Britton, they go deeper than her steadfast and consistent loss of sleep, protecting us from our adolescent impulses during overnight retreats. It's bigger than the foiled meetups at midnight with the boys. Rev's lessons were longer than the deep discussions she may have had with you during your spiritual crisis. Rev's lessons provided more relief than having her presence with you at your bedside in the hospital. Rev showed up throughout my life time and time again. And her message was simple yet complex. This message was delivered with strength, love, and a power in the understanding that once you knew Rev, once she knew you, you were not alone. You were never alone. Not on her watch. And for that blessing, I personally am forever grateful. Thank you.
Mariah Britton was a woman who watched over us like a hawk, and she did it for our good. She also asked a question of us, a question that drew from the wisdom of the writer of Ecclesiastes, a question that challenged us to be self-reflective and to examine the season of our life in which we found ourselves from one stage of development on to the next. She taught us that indeed, to everything, there is a season and a time for every purpose under heaven. Sister Brandy Lily McLean, won't you please come and tell us all about it?
Good afternoon. I'm Brandy Lily McLean. I've been connected to Riverside since birth, thanks to my mother. My memories of Riverside begin with the weekday school. They progress through Sunday school, choirs, joining the church, and many memories that include Reverend Britton, who entered my life during the incredibly formative years of adolescence, like Danielle spoke about. I had what I certainly recognize today as a privilege and honor to be shaped by her ministry. Sundays during second hour, Friday nights from 6 to 10, open gym, Saturdays from 12 to 4, rites of passage. So that's 3 days a week, 10 hours a week, just the right amount of time to turn me into a model youth. So I would like to honor Rev by sharing my personal connection to the What Time Is It theme, to show how Rev dropped these powerful jewels of knowledge, right, in a way that I could access as a 15-year-old and that are still relevant to my 40-year-old self, managing life as a wife, a mother of 3, and transitioning from corporate career to starting a business of my own. What time is it? I'm reflecting on my 10th grade self, where I was introduced to Ecclesiastes 3 during our Rites of Passage youth retreat. A time for everything. Can you think back to your 15-year-old self? What time is it? How many of you were angelic, great students, eager to listen and to learn, and heed advice from your elders? Just simply a joy to behold? Yes? Well, I was a great student, but it is possible that I might have heard more than a few times, just wait until you have kids. Payback. But speaking not just for myself, but for teenagers, and certainly the group that Rev led through Rites of Passage, our agenda was to have fun. We were carefree, but Rev's agenda was so much more. I remember What Time Is It being the cornerstone theme of Rites of Passage. It's a question that was asked at every retreat. It was a game changer. What a loaded question. What time is it? Is it 3 p.m.? Or is it time to go from being a child to an adult? Picture, we're sitting around the room in a circle. The atmosphere has shifted from outside games, fun, challenges, to this serious, introspective, reflective tone. We read through Ecclesiastes 3, and we spend the next several hours into the night considering this question. What time is it? A time for games and play, or a time for work and reflection? A time to listen, or a time to speak? Where do you want to be in your life? What time is it? Are you ready to be a woman? A man? When will you be ready? What time is it? The brilliance of Rev was that she put the power in our hands to think and decide these questions. She didn't preach to us, tell us what to think, how to be. She just asked the question, what time is it? I was a teenager determined to do what I wanted, the way I wanted. Given the power to decide was important, and it's how Rev, with her quiet presence, led us. It may be 6 p.m. or 6 a.m., but knowing what time it is for you was about awareness and if you're doing what you need to do to get to where you need to be. So over the years, Rev was there. Whether times were good and bad and happy and sad. So funeral, she ministered during the heartbreaking loss of my grandmother Lois, my Uncle Michael, Poppy, Aunt Bev. Marriage. 10 years ago, next month, Patrick and I were married by Reverend Britton right here. Another time that was a huge rite of passage in my life. Christenings, just like Danielle. Rev seeing me as a mother was so special and mind-blowing. Just imagining this person who saw me as a wild child develop into a mother, into a wife, was just amazing. So, what time is it? It's a lesson I hold today with the significance that's maybe even more important than when I was a teenager, when it seems I was so much more in touch with my purpose, confident in my direction and place in the world. So I'm listening to Rev and remembering that I have the power to decide what time it is. If I want to make that leap from running around, or if I was able to and become responsible, a wife, a mother, handling millions of dollars of a company's sales volume, I can handle the challenge of running my own company and chartering a new path while ministering to my family, my community. If only there was a rites of passage for grown-ups. In paying tribute to Rev and honoring her legacy, I share this message with you. What time is it for you, in your family, in your community, in the world? Take some time to think about it and then do something about it. My time is up. Thank you.
The central power of youth ministry is the pastoral relationships that people like Mariah build with their young flock. And there is nothing more central to the work of a pastor than to do like Barnabas did when he came to Jesus' followers at Antioch: encourage the saints. Encourage them to persevere in spite of persecution. Encourage them to hang on in spite of anxiety and disappointment. Encourage them to hold on while God gets them through the grief. Encourage them to be strong while the storms of life rage and swirl about you. The Bible says, I would have lost heart lest I had believed that I would see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait on the Lord. Be of good courage, and he shall strengthen your heart. Wait, I say, on the Lord. Dr. Emily J. Jones, we turn to you that you might tell us how Mariah encouraged us through it all.
Good afternoon, everyone. Like Bran and Danny, who have spoken so well before me, Reverend Britton meant the world to me. 20-something years ago, I ran to church because my dad died on a Sunday morning, and I had to get to Rev. And she was right here waiting for me. And so many other times, she's been right here waiting for all of us, and I ask that you hang in there with me as I share this one very big experience that we had together that I think she would want you all to know a little more about. On July 1st, 2005, I called Rev B to tell her how nervous I was that we were finally leaving for Tanzania. Her response was wonderfully Rev. It's an accomplishment we're even going. That's right. I took that to heart, packed up my bags, and off we went. We embarked on a trip of a lifetime to climb Mount Kilimanjaro, also known as the Roof of Africa, the tallest mountain on the continent, the highest freestanding mountain in the world. And while reaching the summit is difficult, people do successfully climb Kili. This can take anywhere from 7 to 10 days. When you attempt a summit of Kili, you never know how you will feel emotionally or physically. And once you are on the mountain, you often feel like you're not sure how you're going to survive. Rev and I felt like that on the first day. I looked to my left, Rev looked to me, she was like, there was real panic. We were in so much pain because of higher altitude, heavy backpacks. rain. It's a rainforest in the beginning, cold temperatures, and fear that we'd made a real mistake. Rev, who was only months out of knee surgery, felt this acutely. At some point on our first day climbing, a Tanzanian got a little close on Rev, and in her cool way, she looked over at this man and gave him the eyes. Needless to say, he moved on. Where's my other piece? Sorry. He offered pole pole. We heard this word a few more times that day, and by night we asked, why do people keep saying that? Why is that repeated? Our guides let us know that in Swahili, pole pole means slowly, gently, softly, quietly, be calm, take it easy, don't excite yourself. So on Kili, it is repeated in an attempt to get climbers to slow down and remember that this journey literally happens one step at a time. Once Rev heard this, she looked at the Tanzanians and was like, you've got to be kidding me. But this is where the real breakthroughs, where God's face beamed so brightly for Rev. Rev's knee was really starting to become inflamed, and physically, her body was showing signs of stress that she had to pay attention to. On night 2, Rev hiked the day and made it to camp about an hour after we set up. On day 3, Rev told us, go ahead, and that she would catch up. We yelled, pole pole, and hiked ahead, making it to camp in time to start setting up our sleeping bags. No Rev. We start to wash up, get ready to eat. No Rev. We start to panic and want to go get her. It's dark. Still no Rev. We are officially banned from forming our own rogue search party. And while Rev is not alone, she's with Urasa, the most wonderful Tanzanian in the world, she is in pain and has now been hiking for more than 9 hours straight. So imagine the relief when we see the pin light from her headlamp. And we start yelling, pole pole. And she yelled back, pole pole. We ran to get her. And she smiled and she said, I'm okay. You don't have to call Carolyn. Rev had pushed herself emotionally and physically beyond any point she'd been before. Even at this level of distress, she was able to find joy and learning in this journey. This was her unabiding faith in action, and it was so contagious. So as we live without Rev in the physical, let us all remember where God's word directs us and where and how we believe Rev B will want us to go forth. When we are so burdened with worry, sadness, and grief, when things seem insurmountable, when we are unsure of what's next, when we have to push ourselves past points of comfort, when we have to give up perceived control and depend on God for true guidance, wait patiently for the Lord and pole pole.
The Bible declares that a righteous man walks in his integrity and that his children are blessed after him. It states further that a virtuous woman opens her mouth with wisdom. On her tongue is the law of kindness. The Rites of Passage program taught us how to be righteous men and virtuous women. Reverend Britton did not move us to that place by force, but instead with a quiet presence that led us and guided us firmly at times, but tenderly when necessary, towards the roadways of righteousness and the venues of virtue. They've asked me to share a few reflections on the Rites of Passage program and its own impact on my life and on the lives of so many of us. What I can tell you is that the Rites of Passage program grabbed each of us at that perilous but promising time when everything could go really well and we could move into a season, Zenobia, of total prosperity, but everything could go really badly if we weren't careful. That's why she watched over us like a hawk and said, "Not on my watch." She said point blank, "There will be no pregnancies on my watch." That's really the full version of what she said. We were trying to clean it up, but we got to keep it real. The Rites of Passage program meant so much to us because of the intentionality with which it was built. In bringing in men and bringing in women who had their own stories of challenges they had overcome in life, but each of whom brought something particular to teach us that we needed to know as we move forward. Now, for some of us, this was something on top of what we were already receiving in all the other places of our lives. But it's also important to understand that for some of us, there were some great gaps that were being filled. Pastor Amy, my parents got divorced when I was 2 years old. I saw my father for all of 10 minutes between the ages of 2 and 25. I grew up with a father hunger that was deep and gnawing, that broke me nearly at times. It was impossible for anyone to feel. My mother, who's sitting here today, did the very best she could, and I'm grateful to her forever for that. But what you need to understand is that for a young black man coming up, even in New York City, even on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, there is nothing more important than for other black men to step into his life and get him under control and direct him in the right path. Dr. Carl Fields Sr., Mr. Carl Fields, Brother John Cardwell, Mr. Guy Robinson, Brother Mark Felder, these men meant so much to me at that tender point in my life when I so desperately needed to have other men who looked like me care about me enough to guide me on the path that I needed to go. It was John Cardwell who taught me how to shake a man's hand and look him in the eye when I did it. You might take that for granted, but if you've ever encountered someone who doesn't know how to shake a man's hand and look them in the eye when they do it, you'll understand why it's not something you should take for granted. I was standing outside with my buddy Davy Beek, waiting for one or both of our parents to come and get us after Rites of Passage one Saturday afternoon, and Brother Guy Robinson was standing out there with us. And of course, as adolescent young man, we thought we had figured a few things out and had fun kind of being cavalier, and Brother Guy Robinson got a phone call from his wife. She was giving him a honey-do list, some things he needed to do before he was allowed to come home. And we kind of looked and we watched. Yes, of course, honey. Of course, take care of that. I'll be there. And we said, man, looks like you're really under wraps here. And he turned to us and said, listen, boys, you're going to realize when you grow up that you're going to trade mothers and fathers for wives and children. Mothers and fathers for wives and children. I said, man, what are you talking about? I've been married for 14 years. I've got 3 kids, one of whom is about to go off to college. And let me tell you something. Guy Robinson was right. The Rites of Passage program guided us. The Rites of Passage program helped to frame what it looked like to grow from a boy into a man, to grow from a girl into a woman, with virtue, with righteousness, with wisdom, not with perfection, because they all knew we wouldn't get there perfectly. I certainly did not, and I don't know anybody else who has. But Reverend Britton, all throughout, maintained this quiet presence to make sure, no doubt, that everything from a programming perspective was going the way that it should have gone, to make sure that the men and women who were the mentors in this program were there as much as they could possibly be, to keep after us and to watch over us, but also to create the space for them to speak their truths to us, knowing whether she knew it or not, though I'm sure she could figure out how desperately a young guy like me needed to hear the voices of these other men, and knowing, of course, how much these young women needed to hear the voices of other women, but creating the space for us to be led, for us to be guided in the ways that we would need to walk. At the funeral, Danielle suggested that we weren't bad kids. We just needed a little bit of direction. I said to some folks sitting around me, she was being charitable. There were moments when we were some bad kids. And I know she was worried that we were going to tear something up down there in that basement, over in that bowling alley. Something was going to happen that wasn't supposed to happen under her watch. She loved us enough to put in place the programming that needed to happen to help us grow from boys into men, from girls into women, to move through this perilous and yet promising time. Perilous and yet promising time, when so much could go so well, but so much, Lorena, could go so wrong if we weren't carefully cared for. And I know that there was some lament that was spoken in Brooklyn about what will happen to the Rites of Passage program and the Mariah Institute in the years to come. And Mr. Fields expressed some lament over whether or not the preparations had been made to carry this forward now that the one who gave birth to it is gone. I spent the first half of that service just weeping in my pew because I grieved through ritual and I had not yet grieved for the loss of who became my spiritual mother. But I also turned to Mr. Fields and I said, listen, I've already told my church in Winston-Salem this as I was getting ready to come down here. They're going to see a whole spread on her in the bulletin tomorrow morning. And I've already told them we're going to do a Rites of Passage program here. And it is going to be part of my contribution to carrying on the legacy of the Rev Dr Mariah Ann Britton. I already told my soon-to-be youth minister, you're going to continue her work, because the young woman I'm bringing on has all of the same kind of gifts and kindred spirit that I remember from Reverend Britton. I said, we're going to continue this work, whatever format, whatever shape, whatever form it takes down here in East Winston, in this First Baptist Church, the oldest Black Baptist church in Winston, North Carolina, to make sure that this legacy continues. So that is my commitment. That will be my contribution, in addition to whatever other contributions I and my family may make to the Scholarship Memorial Fund and whatever other contributions all of you may make to that fund and may make to this work. And I'm going to challenge each and every one of us in particular who came up through the Rites of Passage program and who understand now in retrospect, more so perhaps than we did then, how critical this program was to making sure that we did not squander our opportunity to get to the point where we are at right now. To think and pray and reflect on the way in which you can carry on the legacy of that work and mentoring young people who may not thank you for it at the time, who may not realize how important it is to them at the time, but later on, they'll never forget you. They'll never forget the work that you did. And we will never forget Mariah Ann Britton and that program that she gave birth to that helped to get us to where we needed to be. I'm going to ask Ms. Mika Hale, in the spirit of that program, to come now and share a musical selection that will be very familiar to all of us, Stand By Me.
You know, when I think of Rev, I think of how she stood by me. And all of us, trying to remind us of who we are. I didn't expect to get so emotional. One of the most impactful moments she had in my life was during the Rites of Passage, when we had to climb that 50-foot tower, and I was so scared. I just knew I couldn't do it. There was no way. Everybody was going up, and I was like, I'm going down. It's not happening. And she took me to the side, and she's like, you should at least try. You should try. And I watched everybody, and I thought, one step at a time. And I did. I made it up. And I brought that memory with me through many tasks in life that I felt like I couldn't get through. One step at a time. Oh, can I have more audio, please? Yeah. When the night is calm and the land is dark and the moon is the only light we'll see. No, I won't be afraid. No, I won't be afraid. Just as long as you stand by me. So darling, darling, stand by me. Oh, stand by me. Oh, stand by me. If the sky that we look upon should tumble and fall, or the mountains should crumble to the sea, just as long as you stand by me. So darling, darling, stand by me. Oh, stand by me. Oh, stand now. Stand by me. Stand by me. Stand by me. So darling, darling, stand by me. Oh, stand by me. Oh, stand now. Stand by me. Stand by me. Whenever you're in trouble, won't you stand by me? Oh, stand by me. Oh, stand now. Stand by me. Stand by me. Thank you.
Amen. Amen. I know that Reverend Britton is smiling down to hear that song sung in remembrance of her. As we come towards the latter part of this celebration, closing of these formal reflections, there is finally, my friends, the legacy that is left by the roots that remain where the tree once stood. This church, Pastor Amy, is an international platform for the politics of Jesus. Martin Luther King Jr., Nelson Mandela, Lucius Walker, Joan Brown Campbell, Marion Wright Edelman, William Barber. So many giants of justice have spoken from this pulpit, from this chancel where we stand, in order to declare God's concern for the widows and the orphans, the marginalized and the oppressed, the people living, as Howard Thurman would say, with their backs against the wall. But for many of us here, it was Mariah Britton who made this place our home. At this point in my ministry, I have served in many churches from Des Moines, Iowa, to Chicago, Illinois, to Cambridge, Massachusetts, and now my third post is senior pastor serving the First Baptist Church of Winston-Salem, North Carolina. But as I shared with you on the phone, Riverside will always be my home. And it is in no small part because Reverend Britton helped to make it so. Mr. Robert L. Lilly III, who I once knew simply as Robbie, will offer our last reflection.
Oh, good afternoon, everyone. I don't think it's fair that I should have to go after Shamika. And I'm gonna open in song, so it's really not fair, because if you've heard my sister sing earlier, you know, we don't come from a musical family, so. But here we go. The song that I'm gonna open with is a little bit easier to sing. I don't have to really worry about my range, and I'm expecting you all to help me, okay? All right, even the kids should know this one. I am the church, You are the church. We are the church together. All who follow Jesus all around the world. Yes, we're the church together. Woo! Okay, that wasn't so bad. I think the next stanza goes on to say something about all the many faces, all the many races, all of the ages, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You know, I opened with that song because it just resonates with me when I think about Reverend Britton, and when I think about Riverside, and when I think about this being my home church. And, you know, it's amazing, the committee that put this together. It's really comprised of people that when I think about Riverside, those are the faces that I remember. I remember this geek over here. I remember him. He looks very much just like he did decades ago. You know, I remember, this is not, you know, I can't even begin to tell you how many times I've listened to Shamika's beautiful voice come from right where we're standing right now. I've spoken in the pulpit to the right. I've spoken in the pulpit to the left. I've been baptized in this tub behind me. You know, growing up as a young African-American man in New York City, you know, Paul said it so well, you know, we needed all the support that we could possibly get. I too didn't grow up with my father in the home. You know, I grew up in Riverside Church. I'm 38 years old today, and I've been running around this church for pretty much all of that. You know, and as a young black man, you know, there's so many institutions that we don't feel welcomed in. You know, we're disenfranchised from so many places and institutions, and the church should never be one of them. And Reverend Britton made sure that it was not. I came in a little bit earlier than the service, and I kind of wanted to walk around the church a bit. I went through these doors over here to the left. I don't know if many of you know that those doors, you know, you can get to the gym from those doors. There's secret stairwells and passageways all throughout this church. I've spent nights in this church, brought sleeping bags into this church. I know where the shelter is. I know where the bowling alley used to be. I know where those winding stairwells that have velvet ropes over them lead. I remember the times of the second balcony, third balcony being full, people up to the right, up to the left. I remember where you had to get to this church early to get a seat. You know, I didn't grow up on the Upper West Side. I was on the Upper East Side, Spanish Harlem. I lived on 102nd between First and the FDR. We had a terrace. From that terrace, you could see Riverside. It's amazing. From all the way on the east side, 102nd on the FDR, we lived on the 13th floor, and from my terrace, I could see Riverside Church. My father's side of the family, they're all from Grant Projects, which if you don't know where that is, it's right here on 125th and Broadway. Okay, some representation in here, okay. And, you know, when you take that one train and you go from underground, it comes above ground when you get to that 125th Street stop, and you can see Riverside Church. I ended up, you know, I still live in Harlem, and for a while I was living on 120th and 7th Avenue, and, you know, just walking along 122nd Street, you can look up and see Riverside Church. I lived in DC for 10 years, and every time I used to come back home, driving down the West Side Highway, I could see Riverside Church. And something about that just always centered me, knowing that I could just look up and see my church, and that it was my home, you know, and that I was grounded in that. And I think, for me, that's the legacy that Rev leaves. The feeling of having someplace you could call home, something that was, you know, based in love and God, and people that embraced you no matter what. You know, the Friday night program and Rites of Passage program, these were programs that were not limited to Riverside Church members. And Rev made it her business to do outreach, to make sure that there were people in Riverside Church that represented the communities. My Rites of Passage program was comprised of young men and women from all 5 boroughs. We had people commuting from Queens, Brooklyn, the Bronx, everywhere. I don't think Staten Island came, but the point is, everyone felt welcome here under Rev's watch, and just being able to see the diversity that she brought here, being able to see that there were people that I recognized from grant projects here on Friday night, closing out in prayer, it just did so much for me personally. And again, there's so many places and institutions where we don't feel welcome all the time. And there's so many ropes that we don't feel like we can get beyond. With Rev, there were no ropes. There were no barriers. There was nothing separating her from, there was nothing separating you from the love that she had, the guidance that she had. She was forever accessible to you. And I, went through my share of adversity and got in my share of trouble. Like Paul said, we were kind of bad here and there. But I never, ever had to feel uncomfortable coming to Rev, sharing with her what I had done and seeking her help and guidance. And she gave it freely and willingly. And, for those reasons and more, it has been such a joy and an honor to come together with these faces that I've known for almost 40 years, for us to congregate here in Riverside Church and just thank Rev for everything that she's done for all of us and to send her home properly. So thank you all very much, and thank you, Rev.
Robbie Lilly. Woo! He threw his sister straight under the bus. Oh, he even got started, but she took it in style. God bless you. Won't you join me in this prayer of thanksgiving? God of our weary years and God of our silent tears, thou who hast brought us thus far on the way. We come to you this afternoon with thanksgiving on our hearts because you sent us your daughter, that she might be a mother to the motherless, that she might be a spiritual mother sitting beside our earthly mothers, watching over us and guiding us, embracing us and comforting us in a way that taught us about who you are. We are thankful today that such a great cloud of witnesses has gathered to remember her, to pay tribute to her, to dedicate a piece of themselves to her influence in her name, and to commit that for as long as we have breath in our bodies, the memory of her work here at Riverside and in our lives beyond its walls will never fade away. Show us, O God, how to honor her in the days and weeks and years ahead, even beyond what has been said today. Show us, O God, how to build upon the firm foundation that she established for us. Have mercy on us as we still grieve, and be present in us as we continue to grow in the ways that she would want us to grow if she were here with us now, watching over us the way that she did, so that you might get all the glory. For all that you are, O God, for all that you have done through her life and the life of those who have continued this spirit of her work, we give you thanks, we give you praise. In the name of our Savior and your Son, Jesus Christ, we say amen. I've been on conference calls with this brother for the past few weeks, and I finally told him, I said, man, you sound like Jay-Z on the phone. You know that? Mr. Jason Armstrong. We're going to sing Amazing Grace, our congregational hymn, and then Mr. Jason Armstrong is going to come with our closing and acknowledgments as we reach towards the end. Page 280 in your hymn notes, Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound, save the wretch like me, I once was lost, but now I'm found, blind, but now I see.
Good afternoon. This has been a wonderful, wonderful service. Yeah. I'm going to start by announcing some of the groups that Rev, I don't know if it's Reverend Mariah Britton, we know her as Rev, and as Rev, all right, participated in or either started here. So if you were part of these groups, I've asked you to please stand for a moment. I'm going to start with Friday Night Fellowship. If you were part of that, please stand. Church School, second hour. SOS. Pathfinders. You can stay standing, please. You can stay standing. Please, thank you. Rap Writers and Performance Workshop. Riverside's After School Tutoring Program. Riverside's SAT Prep. The Scholarship and Academic Advisement Program. Send Judah First Step Team. The Riverside Dance Ministry. If you were part of the annual Career Day, Spirit Move events with KRS-One, Hip Hop Speaks, Dr. Glory's Youth Theater, Parent and Team Communication Workshops, and last but not least, which was my favorite, which we have all talked about today, is Rites of Passage. And if there are any people here that outside of Riverside, of programs that she did at the two other churches that she was at, can you stand if you're here today? I had a wonderful opportunity to work with a cast and crew of people to put this together. We were in Brooklyn for her service, and I just remember Zenobia and Carl coming up to us and telling us that we needed to do this service, that the kids who grew up here needed to do this service. And I remember walking out and leaving and walking to my car, and Emily said, Jason, I'm gonna call you. And I didn't really think she would call, but she did. And so I want these people to stand up because I grew up with two of them who were actually in my class, who I love dearly. The other ones, you guys are old. Some of you are young, but it's okay, I still love you guys too. So I'm gonna start with definitely Paul. Thank you, man. Emily, Brandy, Danielle, and Robbie, my bad, brother. And the glue that kind of kept us together, I know we did not put him on the back of this program, but he was the glue that kept us together. He was the one that put the conference calls together. I think everybody knows the code by heart by now because we have talked every Monday night. Patrick, man. And a special thanks to Zenobia, Tawana, and especially, and Tawana, just, all right. And a special thanks to the Britton family for letting us do this. Thank you. I'm gonna share one story with you real quickly. When going through rites of passage at the end, you know you had to make a choice of whether you wanted to pass through or if you wanted to stay as a child or kind of be an adult. And one of the things I learned from, just like Paul said, we had young men, older men who taught us lessons. And one of the things I never forget and I teach my kids is something that I will never forget is that they said to me, no matter how old you get, you will learn something new every day. And Rev, thank you for letting me learn something new every day. So, if anybody was part of Friday night, you know how Rev would call everybody into the gym. People would try to run and hide, and she would catch you and make you go into the gym, and we would close out in prayer. So we would all get in a circle, which we're not gonna do tonight, but what I do want you guys to do is all stand and hold hands. And we're gonna close out in Friday night fashion.
Ready to do this benediction and close out in this way. Pastor Amy Butler has been such a gift to us in this process behind the scenes. We know that much has changed at this church since the days when Reverend Britton was here, when we were growing up here. But it takes the generosity of spirit and a bigness of heart to open up the doors to those who bring that legacy. And I thank you for having that generosity of spirit and that bigness of heart. And the only thing I will ask you, Pastor Amy, is to make sure that Reverend Dr. Mariah Ann Britton's name is said here as often as you can possibly manage for all of the years to come, so that nobody ever forgets that she was here. And I'm going to turn it over to her now, which I think is appropriate for her to take care of our benediction.
As many of you know, Reverend Ford was installed just 2 weeks ago as the senior minister of First Baptist Church in Winston-Salem and senior minister emeritus of the Riverside Church. Dr. Forbes was to do that service. He was unable to do it, so I want to ask him to come forward and send us out with a blessing.
And like we used to say, go forth in the name of the Lord to spread glad tidings abroad. The love that you share and the witness you bear will bring honor and glory to God. Go forth with a joyful amen until we gather again. Remember the word your spirit has heard. God's love is the hope of the world. Amen.